straight up to heaven. We can leave.
Since the start of Dead by Daylight, M1 killers have always been the weaker class. Obviously, they're outclassed at some loops by ranged killers, and they're outclassed at every single loop by more mobile killers or anti-loop killers, like Nurse, Blight, Hag, and sometimes, very occasionally, Trapper. Now, I believe that in the past, few years, as people have gotten better at the game, M1 killers, as they are technically the standard for what a killer is, have gotten easier and easier to loop, and have become harder and harder to play, especially at high ranks. And I think that, number one, I will address the fact that, yes, people have gotten better at the game, and there is only a certain amount of things you can do with a killer who just has no power and just hits people. For instance, once Trapper is out of his traps, there's only a certain amount of things you can do. There is only a certain amount of weird techs and red light hiding you can do before it's just useless. But I think that the main problem behind this, and I think that this is why so many people have been burnt out on Dead by Daylight, and why it doesn't feel as fun anymore, is the maps. The maps in Dead by Daylight have been somewhat terrible for quite some time. The first thing being, they're too big. So many maps are so large that Blight and Nurse, even Blight and Nurse, have difficulty playing on these maps, and they're, basically the fastest killers in the entire game, with the exception of Billy. And I think that's one of the reasons why they are so good, and why they're so meta right now, is because they have that traversal. Never mind their anti-loop, but I think that's why Blight is so strong, is because he can prevent survivors from using all of the gigantic amount of space that they have, which is a huge problem for M1 killers, because they can't stop that. You can't stop the survivor from just, dropping the pallet and running to the next tile. And I think that, especially with the new maps, things have gotten too big, and another big thing is pallets. The pallets are way too bad. Like, on one hand, for instance, I can use an example from the Eyrie of Crows. The pallets in between the mausoleums are either objectively terrible or god tier, and there's basically no way to mind game a survivor at them. That's not good. It is okay to have god pallets. It is okay to have, like, one or two god pallets. It is fine. For instance, on RPD, I think that one of those hallway pallets, the ones that, like, they're just kind of there, and there's really nothing you can do. Like, you can't mind game them? I think that those pallets, it's okay to have one of those. Maybe one of those on one side of the map. That's all right. It's all right to have something like that. But there can't be 3 or 4 or 5. That's insane. That's too much. Pallets cannot be either a 10 out of 10, the killer will never catch you around this pallet, or all the killer has to do is wait for you to take one slight step in the wrong direction and then get hit. I think that that is bad design, because that incentivizes survivors to either drop the pallet and run, or drop the pallet and stand there until the killer breaks the pallet and then run to the next one. That's not fun. That's not a good gameplay loop. That's like, there's no agency. No one has the ability to stop that, and I think that that is why, number one, the new maps are so hated. I mean, look at RPD, Eyrie of Crows, New Haddonfield, Garden of Joy. All of those maps are pretty universally hated. I mean, the Infinite on Haddonfield is just, it's just absurd. Like, why is there Infinites in 2022 DBD? Like, I understand that that was kind of a funny staple of old Dead by Daylight, but old Dead by Daylight was like a gigantic mess. It was insane. I mean, quite frankly, I thought it was fun, but that's just, my personal opinion. It definitely wasn't healthy or balanced, and I think that having something like that, especially in the new Dead by Daylight, is, well, it's bad. It's a bad look. I think that they need to do something about it. And obviously, there isn't much they can do but blocking up more windows. I think that a couple things should happen. Number one, there needs to be more pallets like the desk pallet in RPD. That is the pallet that is in the direct center of the map, behind the hook that normally spawns in the center. It's the one on either side, on one side of the desk. Now, I think this is a perfect pallet. This is one of the best pallets in the game. Not, for either survivor or killer. I think it's one of the most fun ones, because the killer has agency, right? Because there is such a short side on one side and such a long side on the other. If the killer can force the survivor to vault the short side, they will have time to swing around. But if the survivor understands that the killer knows that they can force them into the short side, then the survivor can try and force themselves onto the long side. And obviously, this, doesn't always work, but both characters, both players have agency, and they're trying to outplay each other. That is fun. Trying to get in the mind of the other player is fun. And I think that that is why so many people have said, oh, I'm tired of all these, anti-loop killers, because all you do is drop the pallet and run, right? But that's all you do now anyways. Basically, every killer, you play against them like you play against an anti-loop killer. Like, playing against, Doctor, or playing against, Michael Myers is essentially the same at this point as playing against Pinhead. I mean, you're just running to pallet to pallet, or playing against Clown. You're just running pallet to pallet and pre-dropping. And then, that's not fun. Obviously, there's little minute differences. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but you get where I'm coming from. These maps aren't exactly good designed. And I was playing Survivor earlier today, and I noticed that the chases weren't as heart-pounding as they used to be. It was more like, okay, I'm just going to abuse this window, or I'm just going to use this pallet until he is forced to break it. Like, that's not fun. That's not funny. That's not like, I'm not using my greater skill to, mind game the opponent. I'm just dropping good pallets and then waiting at them, or waiting at good windows, or using the funny Garden of Joy loop, like in the main house. Like, that's not, I don't know. And I understand that this would be difficult to fix, because removing windows and, like, removing pallets from the map, that's also not a good idea, because, again, if survivors feel like there's a dead zone, or, like, if an area turns into a dead zone, that is also not fun. I mean, it's kind of funny for the killer to watch people freak the fuck out, right, when they're locked in a corner, but it's not helpful for the survivors, and it's not fun, for the gameplay loop. And obviously, I play mostly killer, but I understand that survivors want to have fun too. I mean, they're only people. They're just trying to play the game like me. But let me know what you guys think about this. Like, is there some way that we could change maps? That I understand, like, reworking all the maps is, like, something that they could do. I don't even think that they would need a graphical update. They could just rework the maps so that they're a little bit more balanced and have more, pallets that aren't unsafe, but, they're not perfectly safe either. They're kind of 50-50 pallets. Like jungle gyms. Some jungle gyms are well designed. I think that the jungle gym that normally spawns on Ormond, the one that's like a long wall with a window right in the middle, and then there's like a short pallet over there, I think that one's okay. It's not perfect, but I do like that jungle gym. That's a fun one. I don't really like the maze jungle gyms. I think they're a little funny, but they can be pretty entertaining to loop in. It's the same thing with Yamaoka Estate. I like Yamaoka Estate. I like some of the pallets on that map. There's a lot of pretty fun pallets on that map, and I think that Yamaoka Estate is a fairly balanced map. It can be annoying, but I think overall they've done a good job. Like, we should be taking inspiration from those maps that have the jungle gyms and have those tiles and have those areas that if you're not paying attention, you will get fucked up in. But if you are paying attention, you can make it to a new pallet. But it's not like Eyrie of Crows or Haddonfield or Coldwind Farm, where it's just drop pallet, make it to a new pallet, drop pallet, make it to a new pallet. It's, if you drop that pallet, okay, the killer could still hit you. You're still in danger after you drop that pallet. It's not like Coldwind, where 90% of the pallets in the map are safe. Like, for instance, the pallets next to the it's like a hay bale, and then next to the big tractor trailer. The pallet in there, that is a terrible pallet. That is a very poorly designed pallet. There's no counterplay around that pallet. You just have to chase the survivor around. There is no agency. Unless you are playing an anti-loop killer, it's just not fun. And I think that is something that needs to be changed. It needs to be shortened, or something needs to be changed. But let me know what you guys think. I would love to hear it. I would love to hear suggestions. It's really important. Comment it down below. Thank you so much for listening. I try to make discussion videos every once in a while, because I like to think about this game. I like to think about it a little deeper. I like to have a little fun with it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, night, weekend, morning, whatever. Bye-bye.
Straight up to heaven. We